So what you've got here, see, we got a razor blade, right? Okay. You've got a lot of patients, almost the first half of them, who don't have any post-acute care at all. Okay. And the way that I look at this thing, and I'm getting ahead of the slide, but I've got the end here. You've got to come up with 2% on this whole cost. And your opportunity to do that is from here over. That's already difficult. That's a lot different than what we showed you on the other slide and what we'll show you in episode 3. You've got very little institutional care in here. And you've got some train wrecks. Okay, you've got a $200,000 case. And you've got it happening all the way through the episode. Okay, so the issue that I get into, you know, I'm the guy who asks what's there. And other people are the ones who ask, what can you do about it? And what I'm asking is, what can you do about this large number of readmissions that are happening a month or two after the patient has been discharged? And if the answer is nothing, then you're certainly not doing a 90-day episode here. You may be doing a 30-day episode, or you may not be doing an episode at all. But other physicians will say, you have to do something about this. This is a population health management program. You've got to figure out what you're doing there. I'm smart enough to stay out of that one. Okay.
So why is this happening? It's PCI, right? Should be in and out. What's going on here from the day of FC?
Okay, I'm gonna bite.
Yeah.
I'm a physician in the room, I think with a bunch of CMOs. What's PCI?
Percutaneous intervention. So
Percutaneous interventions.
Okay. So right, I got angina when I'm jogging. I get my
Okay.
stent. Should be in and out.
Okay.
Unless you're a stent with a bunch of comorbidities, you're a crash and burn through the ER, half dead, we put you on Impella and all these other crazy things.
And I've had angina for the last 6 months and now I'm
Done
in failure.
everything with it. Right.
And so what happens?
Okay.
At 60 and 90 days, like that, you're getting a valve.
Yeah, because you're just getting sicker and sicker. You fell off your narrow ledge.
But I'm not an outlier.
Right, this is just the progression of the disease.
The simple cases now have all shifted to outpatient reimbursement, so.
Thank
There you go.
What, I didn't hear what you said.
Critical point.
The simple cases have all shifted to outpatient reimbursement, and you've done as inpatient.
Absolutely.
So think about your strategies as academic medical centers. Where do you want to put those pretty low-risk folks, right? Out in the community and or outpatient? Less than 12-hour admit? And who's coming in? This is a very prominent academic medical center who chose this because they have a very strong cardiology group, thought they could manage PCI no problem.
This is a
90 days, guys.
This
It's
is a
whole different
population
world.
health issue, though. I mean, it's not just a single event. This is, you know,
All
a
the
patient who's a train
precursors.
wreck who carries a lot of baggage.
And nobody's identifying on those on the front end, right? They just come to our ER and they have chest pain. And we're managing it from there without having any sense for what their comorbidities are, David, until somebody's in for 24, 48 hours and they get a better sense. But a lot of these folks, you can see it on your graphic, right? When are they coming in? They're not coming back for readmit until late.
Why are you saying hospitals that have taken on PCI, but they're now getting out of it?
I didn't say that, but yes, that is absolutely. No question about it. And so it's raised, it came up, PCI came up the same time that the awareness of this hip fracture came up. Where all of a sudden, they're not making outlier status, you guys. Right? They're not that $200,000 case. Look at them. There's what, 46 hits in there for $500,000, right? So all of a sudden, it's this awareness of what the role is of academic medical centers in your community. You have other community docs who are doing PCIs. You guys are getting the PCIs who also need a valve in 30 days, or in the worst case scenarios, or a transplant at day 80.
And go back to the, I'll be the finance guy again, go back to what you just said about moving to an outpatient setting and throw in the fact that one-day stays for PCI are getting thrown out by Medicare. So how does that affect the cost of the patients during 2009 versus the 2012 baseline period versus now, when you knock out all those low-cost patients? You know, we talk about, the way I talk about it is there's the vision, which is the clinical piece of this, and there's the game, which is the financial piece of this, which is the way the rules work. You're gonna lose the game on that one because of game reasons, because your low-cost cases are getting drained out, and the baseline doesn't cover that. So, I mean, that's another piece that goes in here.
You guys, it's not just bundle payment, right? You can have
Yeah.
your own opinions about bundle payment, but it's any risk, right? It's any population risk model. MSSP, next generation ACOs, you gotta know who's coming to your door. And you gotta manage them from the time they walk in till the time they walk out, regardless of whether you're an ortho guy or a P&R person or a cardiologist. These folks are presenting things that are related to their overall disease.
We're gonna go to episode 3. What does episode 3 look like?
This is OMG episode.
Congestive heart failure, right? What do you see? Red. You've got some post-acute cost in here, you've got a little bit of green in here. You've got enough post-acute cost that there's probably an institutional strategy in here. A lot of this stuff is readmissions, and we're gonna wanna know when those readmissions happen, because that's another piece of the strategy. The one thing I wanted to point out here is you've got a lot of high-cost outliers, not just a couple, a lot of high-cost outliers. If we have time to talk about the risk tracks, that plays into which risk track you choose. At least it does for me, because now, you know, if you've got 1 or 2 train wrecks over 5 years, that's probably something you can handle with normal outliers. But depending on what time period this was, here's a whole bunch of them that are up in the $150,000 range. I really want to know whether those cases were in my base period or whether they're new. And I want to know over what time period I had this volume of them, and whether you guys, the clinicians, think that we can do anything about these. Because to me, that's risk. And to me, I want to carve that out unless you can really convince me that's an opportunity. And look at when it's happened. Almost uniformly throughout this. So we've had conversations. The question I always ask, okay, this is what's here. What can you do about it? What can you guys do? Is this an opportunity in the 30, 60, 90-day post-discharge period to affect this care? If you go back to my slide on risk and opportunity, if you can do something about it, it's an opportunity. If you can't do something about it, it's risk. And I might say on that one, going back over to what that previous slide showed, this may be a 30-day episode. Okay?
But the other
If you're
school of
interested in
thought,
the game. If you're interested in the game, John.
That's right.
If you're interested in clinical management of congestive heart failure, there's a whole lot I can do from day 30 to 90.
yeah, I was going to say exactly that. The other school of thought would be that actually this episode should be 190 days, not 90 days.
Right, CMS doesn't give us that option. I've had 2 comments on this. I've had comments from one group of physicians that said we can't do anything about this, but I've had the other comment that you just heard, which is you have to. So that's purely a what can you do about it call.
For hospitals that have started doing bundles, it seems like the trend is mostly in procedural and surgical areas, which is what we're doing, but we're hoping to learn so that then we can get into sort of the chronic medical. But does that translate, do you see that once you do a surgical and procedural one, that you really do learn more on the medical side, or are we kidding ourselves that we're gonna learn to, you know, sort of be able to do chronic medical ones?
Because I would say we don't know yet. It's 1 year in, we've had 4 reconciliations for the longest folks in quarterly reconciliations. We're at 1 year. What we do know is that from my perspective, it's the faint of heart versus the folks who are committed to this as a strategic model. For the faint of heart, colleagues, as part of their strategy overall, are absolutely making the crossover to medical bundles. They're gonna figure this out. And we have several outrageously brave souls who are looking at 7 and 10 bundles that are all, and John and I have been talking about this, that are bundled, huh? So CHF, cabbage, PCI, valves. If I roll all those guys together, what can I learn? And I stop leaking across conditions, and I'm gathering all of those folks. I have one consistent care team, et cetera. So I believe that's happening already, based on what we're seeing in terms of folks adding new bundles. Medical bundles are growing nationally, despite all of our chest pain looking at this data. And they're doing a lot of fascinating things, I think. And one of those is that not a lot of organizations have really committed to hospice. And one of the issues with recurrent 5, 6, 8, right, CHF admits a year, that's ridiculous. Huh? I've taken care of those folks from the primary care side. It's painful for everybody. And mandatory hospice consultations on all of these folks, for example. Really a commitment to understand what is driving each of those readmissions. Sometimes it's just the relentless disease burden, but other times it's a lot of stupid things that occur at home and in the primary care setting.
I'll answer your question from the other side of the team, which is the game side. And that is, they may not be gaining clinical knowledge, they're gaining knowledge of how bundle payment works. They're gaining knowledge of how to analyze data. They're building analytical teams, clinical analytical teams. So we've got two hospitals where the person that's calling Jess and me as to how to use the analytics model is a physician. Okay, not a data guy like me, but a physician. And so that's the learning that we know is happening, and that crosses bundles. Okay, so at least
So
that.
I would just add to that, that the other learning that's happening, guys, that's fascinating, not only for physicians, which is so cool to watch, but for organizations, is the commitment to risk identification. So they are, for the first time, saying, we gotta know who these folks are, who are walking into our organization, and what all their comorbidities are, and get rehab engaged early on, get care management involved early on. We talk about that. We all have our case management units, but very few, I can list them on one hand, are doing risk assessments on the front end and targeting their high-risk patients with appropriate care management and letting the rest go home and not think about it.
So just to finish off on a couple of points. One of the points that Colleen brought up that I wanted to talk about that we're really talking about more of now is just by pure statistics, the more you bundle, the less your variation is. You just start adding numbers and the variation goes down. A couple of ways of doing it. So if you look at, this is basically variation across time, across quarters, for each of the individual bundle episode families that are here. This is the variation of all of them. It's less. It's lower. And one of the big conveners basically says you should participate in all of the bundles because your variation will drop. And statistically, they're right. Clinically, I think they're wrong. But one of the things that we've started to explore, as Colleen just said, is cardiac valves are really difficult to win. But cardiac valve plus cabbages, plus CHF, plus AMI, plus PCI, all have the same type of clinical strategy. And when you start adding up the numbers, your variation drops, your CFO gets less angina, you're more likely to be able to stay in the program. Okay, so numbers, higher volume, anchoring episodes, offsetting value variations. And I've only got a minute left, so I'm going to. So this is basically this is coefficient of variation on major joints, 7.5%. Coefficient of variation on everything, 6.1%. Major joints has got low variation to begin with. So the point is that adding more episodes makes things better. Okay, we really think that that makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to go through risk track selection because it's somewhat esoteric. This one I wanted to point out because this is back to PCI again, and I wrote a paper on this. Basically, sometimes you just can't win. You got to pick up, like I said earlier, your whole 2 or 3% out of this whole episode here. There's nothing here. And you've got several really high-cost cases up here. Because of this, you really have to choose the third risk track, which basically limits any costs over the 75th percentile. Okay, and I didn't get into that, so just have to believe me. What you're doing is basically saying this $200,000 case is really going to cost you, compared to your target, somewhere around $80,000 because CMS is going to absorb the difference there. You've chosen risk track C, which is the 75th percentile. But because of that, you've given up 80% of your opportunity to reduce these costs in this quartile here. So you got to get your 2% out of the post-acute costs here and stuff here. So that's basically why I think this is never a winner. The way you win on this one is you combine it with other stuff, like we were just talking about. Want to talk about precedents for a second? 2 minutes?
Okay, sure. So you might have heard this concept if you attended a couple of the sessions yesterday that mentioned bundled payments, but precedence is to bundled payments what attribution is to ACOs, so figuring out which provider owns that episode, owns that patient for that period of time. And because in BPCI we have different awardee types, so it could be a SNP, a physician group practice, a hospital, and we have different model types entering the program at different times, you can imagine how complex it is to figure out who owns that patient. And there's a series of 7 rules that we try to describe, using a decision tree, this if-then statements. But ultimately in this program, if you go in at the same time, the physician group practice wins the episode over the hospital. So if it's a physician group practice whose surgeon is operating on that patient in your hospital, the money, the reconciliation, all goes to physician group practice. So this draws in a number of other interesting issues that we won't get into now about how should you start to gain share funds amongst these providers, and what do you do if a hospital puts up the upfront investment into building this program, but the financial reconciliation accrues to physician group practice.
And that's a very scary thing for hospitals. So, like I said, it's all about opportunity or risk, figuring out which way each episode goes, and whether you've got enough volume, whether you've got the post-acute relationships, whether you've got control, whether you've got an episode you can participate in or not. And that's it. Any more questions? If not, our contact information is here. Jess will be around for a while. I will not. But please feel free to reach out.